Welcome back to Doing Diaspora. I'm delighted to be joined by an old friend and sparring partner on everything from alumni to diaspora engagement for many years now, Dr. Maria Gallo. First of all, welcome, Maria.
Thank you. It's a pleasure. Pleasure, Maria.
It's great to have you, and just for our listeners and the audience, just to give you a sense of Maria's background, which is quite extensive. She's the founder and principal of KITE, which is Keep in Touch Education, a social enterprise that focuses on the transformative potential of alumni connections. She has over 20 years experience in leadership roles in higher education management as a scholar and alumni relations professional. In addition to KITE, she is visiting research fellow with the Centre for Social Innovation at the Trinity Business School, Trinity College, Dublin. Her TED Talk, We Are All Connected by One Word, Alumni, is only one of a handful of alumni-related TED Talks available. So well done on that.
Yeah,
I enjoy listening to it quite regularly. She has research interest in the interface of alumni as diaspora, and that's why we're here today. And last year she worked on a scoping study with the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade of the Irish government on an alumni global network for Ireland, which I think is incredibly important and timely. She also has several academic publications on alumni relationship building and volunteering. In 2013, her published research drew on her doctoral dissertation from the University of Sheffield, which was awarded the H.S. Warwick Distinguished Research Publication from KITE. She remains actively involved in many of her alma maters in all forms in Canada, the UK, but most importantly, Ireland. So Maria, welcome. Thanks for your time.
Thanks very much, Martin. This is going to be an interesting chat.
Yeah, look, I mean, the beautiful thing about your background for me is that blended experience. And I think there was one question when I was thinking about, what do I have to ask Maria at the beginning? And I think the first question is, why was it alumni for you? What brought you to it?
Yeah. It's interesting. I always kind of, when I reflect on this, Martin, the word that always comes up is kind of a bit of serendipity. I was one of those students who was supremely involved at university. I went to the University of Toronto. I was super involved on campus in loads of activities. So when I graduated, I immediately got a job on campus. It was probably no surprise to a lot of people. And eventually I fell into work in the Division of University Advancement, which included alumni relations, and I fell into alumni relations work. And it was something that kind of just struck me even at that kind of young and early career stage was, wow, there's all these people out there who have had the same experience as me. And there's a lot of potential for them to help not just my career, but loads of other people's careers. They have an opportunity to help each other, you know, and it was just something that I thought there was all this kind of percolating kind of potential. And I was really interested in wanting to explore that. So I decided that the best way to do that, alongside working in the area of advancement, I worked as a fundraiser, I worked as in alumni relations, running reunions and events, was I did my doctoral studies in this area, looking at the relationship between a university and their alumni, and it became this kind of fascinating kind of passion of mine to see, because whenever I meet people, Martin, it's like usually the first people, if I meet somebody in the security line in the airport and we're chit-chatting, it always kind of comes down to an alumni conversation. You know, oh, you're doing this, you want to do this next in your career. Have you gone back to your university? Have you outreached to other people who have, graduated in the same program as you? And most people say, gosh, I've never thought of that. And so to me, there was that kind of that potential that I think needs to be released, whether that's at an individual level, organizational level, at a government level. To me, there is alumni potential that can help at all those levels, at a macro and a micro level. So that's kind of how I got interested in it, and it's just kind of spiraled from there. So
no, it's incredible, and I think those conversations that you have. And I say this as somebody that worked as a young academic, and when you look around the landscape, particularly in Ireland, we're only just at the beginning of this, in a sense of the alumni piece, and given where the world is, so how did that bring you to KITE? Because as we saw from the background and the bio, you have that incredible blend, but you also have that incredible story of being a very courageous social entrepreneur, probably mid-career, in the sense of where do we look for the next 15 to 20 years in terms of Maria Gallo Inc. through KITE.
Yeah. Thanks very much, Martin. That's really kind. I think it just, Again, it was that idea that, you know, when I moved from Canada to Ireland, and that was many, many moons ago, almost 2 decades ago now, which is incredible. You know, I saw that alumni relations was supremely at its infancy on this side of the Atlantic, or on the, you know, the Irish side of the Atlantic. And I thought, wow, that means there's even more potential here. That was my kind of sense. And then as I spent more time kind of meeting colleagues and networking across Europe, it made me realize that this was actually something that across Europe was something that, you know, people hadn't really, you know, they hadn't tapped. It was it was an untapped resource that people hadn't yet, you know, looked at. So when you know, I've been living in Ireland for a while, but I live in rural Ireland. And so the idea of working directly in a university to be looking and to, you know, be studying areas of philanthropy has been something that I do kind of at a distance. And so therefore the idea of doing it, you know, through a social enterprise, so that I have a lot more, you know, kind of control and a lot more opportunities to build that beyond in Ireland and beyond Ireland. I thought that, you know, KITE was a way to do that. And, you know, I'm in the process of getting a book published in the area, Martin. As you know, it's been a labor of love. And hopefully that will be in the next, let's say, 12 months. And that's really to kind of, to help inform individual alumni about the importance of their own personal alumni self. I kind of thought that that would be a really good anchor for KITE. So when I developed KITE, I thought, you know, of that image of, you know, you can imagine a kite up in the sky, and it has this kind of tie, this string that kind of is below, and that it has an opportunity to be steered, but it can soar super high. And I always kind of think that that's kind of a good metaphor for our shared connections that we have in our lives, those alumni connections and diaspora connections too. And that, you know, we have this opportunity of kind of being able to soar based on, you know, our kind of long-standing ties. And if we cut those ties, we do soar high in the sky, but it's quite out of control, and we don't get the opportunity to kind of to anchor back to something with others, and to be able to network with others in the same way. So it's important to have that kind of, you know, long-standing connection. And that was the imagery around KITE that I wanted to portray. So right now, I'm working with governments. I work with universities across Europe. I'm currently also working with an association, you know, in the States, in the US, building their alumni strategy and their alumni networks. And that's where I want to be, Martin, is to help organizations to build their alumni connection. Yeah.
No, look, I think it's incredibly timely, and look, let's use the big bad word, COVID. You know, in the sense of how have you seen the sector, I suppose, being COVIDized? Because, you know, what's really interesting for me is you're touching on something when you talk about that kind of untapped potential or resource, particularly this side of the Atlantic. You know, when you look at what's behind that and get into the nuances of what's behind us, maybe lagging a bit. You know, the demand for knowledge and the demand for solutions in the alumni piece, I can imagine, is only growing because of COVID. So do you see a change in the tone of question, maybe the style of question, or the type of solution that people are looking for? You know, I presume a lot of it is digital nowadays, but I just love to get your thoughts on how that alumni piece has been COVIDized, because it's something we're looking at on the diaspora end, and we don't really have an answer yet. So I'm a big believer in kind of looking outside the box in many ways. And so I'd be interested to get your opinions on, you know, are those questions changing from your clients or your partners, or what they're trying to do with change? Because I think the key word in all this is philanthropy that you mentioned. I think that's where the world is going to go. It's going to be much more ambitious, much more hopefully courageous in our giving. But I just love to get your ideas on that.
Sure. Well, I mean, I think it stems and starts as, you know, when I started in working in alumni relations, and that was well over 20 years ago, you know, you needed the university to outreach and to find other fellow alumni. That was the reality. And now they have this kind of phenomenon, as you know, are well aware, and it has a big word, and it's disintermediation, which basically means that we can find each other without the university. You know, it used to be that the university had to send out a postcard, and I used to do this frequently in the 1990s, you know, saying, you know, there's this person who's trying to reach out to you. Here is their details. You can contact them. Now we don't have to do that anymore. We've got LinkedIn, we've got Facebook, we've got all these kind of, you know, these ways to network without the universities. And so this has put alumni relations in a bit of a crisis. So, you know, how can they show value in people staying connected with their alma mater, with their university? And this is on both sides of the Atlantic. This is kind of, you know, the crisis point. And so what universities have tried to do is to find those important points, touch points. And I think COVID has really brought this to the fore. So universities have really stepped up to the mark. And I've been kind of watching this a little bit. You know, I've been, you know, following a lot of social media, watching a lot of universities across the world on how they're doing their alumni relations work. And, you know, what's coming out is they are listening to alumni. You know, right now alumni need career support. So they are responding by providing, you know, webinars, seminars. They're extending a lot of their services, you know, career services, etc., to allow people to have a longstanding service. And people are going to start to see, hopefully, and, you know, alumni are going to start to see that there is value in a lifelong connection. So there's no point just running away with your degree, but in fact, to kind of stay connected either with your university or whatever the alumni connection that you have. It could be with a lot of other things. It could be your alumni connection from a corporate perspective, you know, your past employer. It could be, you know, lots of other things. So, you know, I think that COVID has brought that to the fore, that they've had to step up to the mark. These organizations have had to kind of reinvent what they're doing so that it has a lot of valid and you know, validity and a lot of value for alumni. And then they've also put out the call and saying, you know, we're here, and, you know, you may or may not as alumni be in a good position, but there are others that are very vulnerable. And so they put out a lot of these calls around saying, you know, let's help those vulnerable international students who can't go home. We have a fund set up for that. And, you know, university alumni are responding in their droves. They're finding that people are coming out of the woodwork and saying, yes, I want to support people, and this is a way I can support them. And philanthropy has really, in that university sense, has really kind of been a great responder. It's a way that when people are in situations like pandemics, I think people are finding that as a really as an outlet where they can really help people. And have that kind of transformative effect that philanthropy can have. And also from the research side, so people are saying, well, I'd like to be able to support, you know, research in this area around, you know, COVID and finding vaccines and research in the area. And I'm willing to kind of, you know, put my money behind that. So people and alumni are finding that that's a valuable way, and they do that through their alma mater. And I think that that's very valuable. And it's shown that it's not just something that's happening in North America, but in fact, on this side of the Atlantic, some of the most successful, you know, campaigns are in places like in Ireland, in the UK, and beyond. I know that across the Netherlands and things, they've had a lot of very successful campaigns with brand new donors. And I think that that's, I think the question remains, Martin, is, you know, how do they maintain that momentum? I think that's really, you know, that's the next step, is that, you know, how do you kind of get all these engaged alum that got engaged because of COVID, because they're at home? How do you keep them engaged? How do you maintain their engagement? So that's the next, you know, piece in the puzzle.
Well, it's fascinating you say that. And look, I don't know if this is a fair question or a question you want to answer, but tell me if not. You know, the hidden ingredient in all this, just looking from afar in terms of, because we've spoken a lot about universities at the moment, but, you know, when you mentioned as well the corporate world in terms of alumni engagement, you know, I think alumni pops up in many different sectors, and sometimes we just need to call it as we see it and call it that, you know. So the movement around corporate alumni fascinates me, particularly for diaspora. But I want to get back to the question of momentum that you bring up, and how do organizations, whether they're universities, whether they're businesses, whether they're nonprofits, whoever's involved, build that momentum and sustain it. And I think the key word is trust. You know, and I think if you look at the value of what a university provides to somebody that has studied there or worked there or gone through the cycle, universities have an incredibly powerful story to tell on the power of trust. You know, because technically, you know, the relationship between student and university, the university provides a service, you know, and the duty of care to that student. You know, I won't tell you who told me this, but it's an Ivy League university who, and as somebody who works for their alumni engagement piece told me many years ago that when they walk through that gate for the next 4 years, we're their family.
Yeah.
You know, and that inherently talks about trust. You know, that they will trust us at the end of it. So how important do you see the trust component in all this? Because going back to the diaspora lens, the number one point you'll hear again and again is that, you know, diasporas don't trust the organizations that are trying to engage them, particularly if they're government. So do you see a space for, you know, not just universities to share their story on how to do this and the models of how to do this, but most importantly, just, you know, who's occupying that middle ground of trustworthiness engagement? I know that sounds mouthful.
Yeah.
This is just thinking out loud, but I'd love to get your ideas.
Well, you know, first and foremost, when you think of trust, right, it is what you say, you know, you think of parents and they've entrusted, like you said, they've entrusted their children in a university for 3 or 4 years. I mean, that's, or, you know, that people have invested a lot of money and then they put trust in an institution to say, I'm going to get something out of this experience. And equally, if it's in a corporate environment, it's the same. You know, I've decided to take my experience and bring it to your organization, right? And that they instill trust in that organization, that it's going to be a place where they can flourish and they can grow. And, you know, when that happens, and hopefully it happens for the majority, if not all, that they have this kind of transformative experience, even if there are, you know, bumps in the road, which I think is part of the learning and the growth that people can have, that they want to feel that out the other side, that, you know, how do we kind of develop that fostering that trust can continue? Because what I think has happened, and, you know, again, I'm going to get a bit controversial here, is that you talk to any alum on the street, you talk to anybody, oh, where did you go to university? And they'll tell you, and then they'll say, yeah, the university only contacts me when they want to ask for money. You know, and that is, and that I think is a breakdown of trust, that people, that is the feeling that people get, that is the only time the university is contacting them, that they have their hand out. And, you know, I think that universities are now realizing and have recognized that that is the case, that sometimes somebody's first encounter with their university afterwards is to ask them for something, asking them for a donation or, you know, something like that. And it is about building a lifelong relationship, because that can otherwise erode that trust that you're talking about, you know, that trust that they had maybe while they were a student. And to me, there is this idea, and this is part of the research that I would do, Martin, is, you know, would have done, was that idea that, you know, you have to build that affinity first. You have to build the engagement, you know, for themselves, and then the support will come, you know, that whether that's philanthropic giving, whether that's them becoming, you know, long-standing volunteers. But that's how trust happens, is that, you know, you have to kind of go through this longer standing process of, you know, saying, you know, we value you as, you know, a new alum, we value you as a former employee, we're going to get you involved in the society, you can get involved in these events, it can help to build your career, and then we might ask you to become a mentor, then we're going to ask you for money for a particular, kind of fund or a particular cause within the university. So I think that that's how the trust is built. Is it's built because people feel that it's something that that can have value. You know, it's a mutually beneficial proposition, and that's how the trust is built, is through that kind of that everybody kind of wins.
I want to come back to something. We'll come back to it in a moment, but just remind me in case I forget.
Yeah.
As you know, I'm quite forgetful.
Yeah.
Look, I think you touched on something really important when you use the word affinity, and I want to come back to that concept in a moment, particularly for diaspora engagement when we get to that. You know, as you were speaking, the phrase I was jotting down and thinking in my head was, you know, Maria is essentially talking about a culture of alumni engagement that is happening, and do you see, you know, a very simple but maybe a blunt question, do you see a change in the necessary skill sets that should be in and around the development office for a university or any organization, given what's happened over the last couple of months, but talking more broadly to that wider culture of alumni engagement? You know, because the danger you have if the perception is out there from the alumni matter, whoever it is, that they're getting tapped up for money, that gets quite a tiresome ask for many people. So I'm just wondering more broadly about the skills needed to do this well, you know, because I think where I'd love to kind of shift it in a moment is to that issue of affinity and belonging, because I think that's where the connections of alumni and diaspora worlds collide. And that's where we can do some really interesting work. It's just that, and this is me holding my hand up because I've been complicit in it, you know, people in the diaspora world not being courageous enough to put our head outside the window in many ways. So let's tackle the skills question first, and then maybe we talk a bit more on the affinity and belonging.
Sure. Well, skills, I mean, obviously the immediate one that comes to mind is, you know, you need people who are people. You need people that want to go out and, you know, it is a job around networking, building relationships. And you need people who are, who see this 24/7 as their role, not 24/7, but, you know, they see it as their role whenever they are interacting with alumni. And, you know, I've had experiences, Martin, myself, where, I've had, you know, I've had kind of a bad taste in my mouth where I'm a longstanding volunteer at one of my alma maters, and I'm not. I kind of get this feeling that I'm kind of being passed off, or you know, they're just connecting me. It's a very quick process, and they forget that part of what they're doing all the time is cultivating that relationship all the time. And sometimes I have been in a situation where I said, well, if I didn't love my alma mater, I think I might disengage. And I'm somebody who is super engaged. So that's kind of the scary prospect. So you need to have people who understand that it's an always on prospect of how they cultivate relationships. I think that's a really important kind of component of working, you know, in that alumni relation space, whether that's in a university corporate environment, whether that's, you know, within a fellowship program. You know, the alumni, as you know, is kind of popping up everywhere. So, and that's kind of a recent trend, and we can talk about that too later on. But to me, that's kind of the number one, you know, fundamental. And that's where the areas of trust come in, and, you know, building, you know, those kind of relationships and building that affinity, as you say. To me, that happens when you have those people who get it. They don't always have to be extroverts. I think there's also this perception that they have to be extroverts to work in alumni relations. I think introverts are maybe some of the most crucial people that can be involved in this, because they can cultivate relationships in a quieter, subtle, but also still a very meaningful way without having to be kind of, you know, shouting from the rafters. You know, I think it's really important that you have a good combination, but it's about people understanding that that is the fundamental for what their job is we're here to, you know, build value and build relationships with people.
Let's look, you mentioned, and we might come back to it, let's talk now about alumni popping up everywhere. You know, what do you mean by that? Because I'm sure you'll have people that listening to this that are working very much in the mainstream alumni world and saying, where else is it popping up? You know, because that's where you learn something new in many ways. Yeah. You know, so where do you see it popping up? You know, and I'm certain that the last couple of months, you know, have been absolutely fascinating for people working in the sector. So, yeah. So where is it emerging? And look, I think we have to be courageous to be positive on this. You know, this could be a really beautiful moment for alumni. So please tell us, where's it popping up?
Yeah. I mean, I kind of think if it's a shared experience that people have had, I've seen it popping up in an alumni sphere. So whether it's a summer camp, whether it's a sports team, whether it's also governments recognize, and this is a big one we can talk about, you know, I think that's where the bridge between, you know, diaspora and alumni really meet, is how governments are really recognizing that their former international students, that they have spent time studying in a country, that they now are, you know, this global alumni of whatever country they were studying in, that you know, these are really powerful things. And like I said, corporates too, that, you know, there is this corporate alumni movement that has really grown in the last, you know, 5 to 10 years. So you're right, it's not just, and then there's of course in there's also primary and secondary schools. So there's a big movement too in the global South in particular, looking at how do we build networks that are not the traditional old boys networks that we think about alumni, but actually capacity building networks. So, you know, that the idea that, you know, you have a primary school or a secondary school in Ghana, for example, where some of this is happening, and, you know, they're getting the opportunity to connect with alumni. If they're the students that are pupils in that school are getting the opportunity to connect with alumni, in order to kind of have these, you know, life connections and to understand where they could be in 4 or 5 or 6 years or 10 years. those are really kind of transformational relationships. There's been these explosions, and you wouldn't believe it, Martin, there's also, fellowship programs, anybody who's involved in pretty much anything where people have had a formal shared experience, they've created these alumni networks. I know in the UK, they have areas like, Police Now has started a fellows or an alumni program. And the idea is you have all these people with the shared experience, and then they can start to exchange knowledge, and they can actually, build relationships among each other, so they can create like a community of practice so that they can be better at the work that they're doing. And I think that's kind of, it's really spanning a wide range of areas. And so alumni has kind of really exploded. So now it's our opportunity now to make sure that what's being done is very good practice. That it's not just someone saying, oh, I better do alumni because everybody else is, but that we actually do it effectively, and that we do it not just for the benefit of the organization, but also for that benefit for the individual who's getting involved. And that's what's going to sustain it long term. That's going to build that momentum. That's going to keep things going, because both sides are going to see its value.
And Maria, this might be coming in from left field. And look, I don't know if you would agree or disagree on this, or disagree on it. As you were speaking, the boring academic in me was going back to the sense of definition. When we say alumni, what do we mean by it? And as you were speaking, you were articulating an incredibly inclusive idea of shared experience. Now, if we look on the streets, or if we look in the halls of power in some of the great countries of the world at the moment, it's riddled with difference and division. So, how can we take some of the lessons, I guess, of that commonality that you mentioned of, and that shared experience, and put it to use in that lens? You're going to see a lot of interesting discussion and a lot of strategic giving at an individual and an institutional level, and a lot of time and attention given to issues of diversity and inclusivity over the next kind of foreseeable future. And in the back of my mind, I've always been thinking that, how alumni engagement and alumni relations tackle those issues of commonality is incredibly important for where all those discussions are going. My concern is, will those people be invited into the room, or how do we get them invited into the
Yeah, and it's a really good point, Martin, because one of the things, when I talk about when I think about the definition of alumni, or that kind of alumni engagement, I'm always thinking it's an inclusive, not an exclusive term. We're in an incredible position now where a lot of our higher education environments, a lot of our environments where alumni is happening, they've widened participation. So you see widened participation in lots of things. You have more people who are going to university. You have more people getting involved, in working in different sectors. And at the end of the day, the alumni piece is the inclusive bit. It's not an exclusive club, as is once thought, is that, this is about an old boys club. There's a lot of nudging and winking. And in fact, it's much more about, saying, we've all had this shared experience. It might be at different times. It might have been in different, you might have had different affinity levels. You might have, been involved in different things, but ultimately we've had a similar shared experience. And therefore we should all be sitting at the table. We can all be sitting at the table. We can have, a common conversation. And there's also this idea, and I don't want to get too academic or, on this, but, if you're familiar with Pierre Bourdieu, he would talk about this, the idea of the game, and saying, if you want to be able to play the game, you need to know the game you're playing. And the end of the day that's the importance of the alumni piece, is that we need to tell alumni, people who've graduated, who maybe have no tradition of that in their history. They might be the first in their family to go to university. They might be mature students. They might be people from, certain socioeconomic communities. Is to say, look, here's the game. You're now part of this alumni group, and you have all of this rich, kind of enriching kind of alumni at your disposal. You have a university at your disposal that, are for you to help you to kind of progress in your life and in your career. But they need to know that. They need to know that this is the game, right? And to me, some people know that innately, and that's because that's something that they've seen in their lives. They've seen it around them. They've seen it with their neighbors. And if people don't have that, they don't know that that's the game that they can play, and they don't know if it's something for them. Alumni is not for me, that's for different people. But in fact, we want to make sure that everyone feels that they are part of an alumni group, and that's the piece about the inclusivity. And it also goes back to the identity piece, Martin. This idea that until people feel that they identify as an alum, they won't be one. You can't be something, you can't kind of engage in a particular environment unless you identify as part of a group. And I think it's the same from a diaspora perspective. It would be the same. You have to think of yourself as Irish American, and if you think of yourself as that part of your identity and that's internalized, that helps you to then externalize and to act on that particular identity. And I think the same goes for the alumni piece, that you need to have that internal recognition before the external action can happen. And so to me, there is an immense amount of potential around, educating, and, that's part of the reason why the word education is in the Keep in Touch, in the KITE name, is because I think there's an important component around how do we educate all alumni to understand that this is part of who they are, is that they are alum for life, and that they have these connections, these networks that they can draw on for their whole lives.
Perfect. So quick question before we get into governments.
Yeah, I know, great.
Role of communications and technology in all of this. And how has that kind of changed the landscape a bit? Because, we will come to it in a moment. When you talk about identity, particularly in a diaspora context, it can often be highly politicized, and what we're seeing is actually technology and communications being incredibly useful in breaking down some of those barriers. Even going back to the earlier conversation that we were having, and when you were talking about helping people with that are vulnerable over the last couple of months, very simple questions about how do we capture those stories, and how do we get those stories out to kind of win the marketing message in many ways on diaspora. So look, I'd just love to get your ideas on kind of technology communications, because then I think we have a very beautiful link into identity and affinity and alumni and diaspora, which leads us to government.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know about you, Martin, but in the last few months, I've been in lockdown like everybody else, and I have had the opportunity to outreach to more alumni connections than I ever had in the last year, I'd say. So, it's been an incredible experience, and that's from both ends. So I've had people outreach to me who are, alumni, people that have graduated even in the last year. And I've had the opportunity to have these really quick conversations. And to me, it's almost like it's permitted now that, we can be on Zoom, we can do all these things. It's almost like we've been given permission to have all of these kind of conversations. I found it's extremely valuable. And I think that that's where technology, I was thinking about this last night, Martin. To me, I think it's a real democratization of the kind of alumni landscape, that we now have connections. I mean, I've connected with people across multiple time zones, people that have been, that are 8 time zones away, 4 time zones away, and I think other people are having those experiences too. There seems to be more permission, and this is what I've explained to a lot of younger grads when I've had these conversations, and when I'm mentoring them, I say, look, find someone who has a job that you're interested in, outreach to them, and have a 15-minute Zoom conversation. You can do that now. That's something that a year ago people might have gone, oh, I don't know. But now it seems to be very permitted. And I think that that's a really exciting prospect, that people kind of have this world wherever they are. So even if they are in, real social isolation, for example, or if they're out in lockdown or things are getting back to normal, they have all of this at their disposal. And to me, the technology won't change now. I think people have gotten used to a lot of this interface online and, those communications. And then the other thing I would say to people all the time is, how much do you see what the university is doing? How much are you connecting with their social media sites, or, with your alumni connections? So, how much are you connecting with your everything from your former sports teams to your awards that you might have gotten? Find them on social media, connect with them, and find out there might be opportunities that come up that you didn't know about. And this is the time to kind of populate your social media feeds with things that are about your shared connections. I mean, this is the time to do it. And if you don't do that, then you could potentially be missing out on things that could be great for your career, or that you might be able to pass on to others. That could be things that you could be helping your fellow grads or your fellow alumni with great opportunities for either career or personal interests and things like that. And to me, I see things, Martin, as simple as a virtual summer camp for kids. And I think, oh man, like I have a friend who's graduated from X university and they're providing this. I'm going to send that on to them because they have kids in that age group. And then you know what, people are going, wow, that's amazing. I have something like that now to my disposal I didn't know about. Yeah. And I just think that those things are simple, but I think communications, I think that we're in a good time to be able to really use technology to its full potential, and that it's not just an add-on. To me, it's going to be an essential from now on around the alumni space.
I think that's a very, very timely comment, actually, in the sense of the essential nature of it. We would have always been big advocates. You mentioned networking earlier, and being a people person to be working in and around this world. And we would have seen the ability in your networking to be high tech and high touch. Yes. As kind of integral to that. And obviously there'll be varying moments in history and engagement where you have to be more high tech or less high tech, and more high touch and less high touch. Yeah. And that's kind of where we are. So look, that was incredibly enriching on alumni. We'll probably come back to it before we close, but no, I'd love to just, because the title of this series is Doing Diaspora. Yeah. Well, let's put on the diaspora hat for a minute, and we've mentioned some words and ideas and concepts that I think are just incredibly important in illustrating the connections between alumni and diaspora. Because let me be honest, when people ask me, what's the best diaspora engagement model out there, I don't give them a country. I give them the US Ivy League alumni engagement. Because you have engagement, you have the micro engagement, and it works incredibly well. So I see affinity and belonging as the kind of lens, coming back to identity or definition, to get into that discussion. So where do you see those connections in terms of alumni, diaspora? And the second part of that question, to kind of get us towards the future and kind of wrapping up, what would you love to see KITE doing in this world? Because there'll be people listening to this conversation that work in the diaspora world that maybe haven't thought about alumni before. Mm-hmm. So where do you see the connections? And most importantly, with your KITE hat back on, where would you like to see KITE going in this work?
Great questions. Great question. No. Great question. Sorry, I'm having, this is a good moment now because we're having people.
No, you're good. You're good.
No, it's good. Sorry, I have like little ones coming in.
Yes.
Right at the crucial time. Yes, it is. All right. Now we know for sure that we're in the right lockdown time, aren't we?
I had my two little nieces running around the back road just today, and we were dining into Azerbaijan.
Nice. Well, I mean, what I would say though, Martin, is, people want to kind of, that diaspora piece is around, how you feel. I think a lot of it is about a feeling. And to me, I think that's part of the reason why alumni has become something where governments have started to perk their ears up around this alumni space, because they're realizing that people are they're investing time to come to a country to study, and that they then build this affinity. They have an affiliation because they went to university in a particular place, but then they build an affinity. No, it's fine, Tara. Thank you. Sorry. They build that affinity, and with the place that they're studying. So it's not just about the university, but they actually have, love the country from where they studied, and they want maybe others to have the same experience. So to me, that's kind of, it has it draws those parallels to the diaspora piece, because, people feel that they have this connection to place. And I believe that that's the same for alumni, that they end up having this connection to place. And it can be much deeper to that. It can be, and instead of maybe, the place where their ancestors are from, it can be much more about, their connections to other things, and how their connections to, the university where they studied, or particular places that they enjoyed visiting. And I'm really like, that's a real untapped resource. As I said earlier, I just kind of feel that, we're in a position where governments are starting to sit up and realize that, this is the time to think of diaspora in its widest sense. And to me, alumni is a really important component of that, because they are and could be your greatest ambassadors, your greatest investors, your greatest promoters, your greatest future tourists to your country, whatever the case may be, and also your greatest future talent. You know, a lot of countries are realizing that, you know, that they have to kind of think about not just the future of their international education, and that is one of the fundamentals on why they would want to connect with their alumni is, you know, this internationalization of, you know, education, but also supporting future talent and saying, you know, we might have a shortage in our country of engineers or whatever the case may be, and our international alumni, our global alumni group, could actually be people that might be able to fill that shortage. But they can also be the people where there, you know, is that kind of lifelong, you know, knowledge sharing that can happen, research sharing, you know, building of innovation, building of enterprise, like that can happen when we build a wider ecosystem of, you know, diaspora. So people feel that it's much more inclusive as opposed to exclusive. And then, of course, there's the idea too around fostering, you know, that public diplomacy piece, that, you know, it's not just our diaspora that can do that and wear this, you know, hat for a particular country, but also it can be our, you know, international alumni who have, you know, kind of gone abroad, and they can be promoting the sustainable development goals. I just kind of believe that this is something that's kind of, you know, slowly emerging, that, you know, that alumni around the world are having a big impact on the UN SDGs. And this is something that, that, you know, countries can then go back and say, that was one of ours that, you know, that graduated and did their PhD in our country, and now look at the great work that they're doing on, you know, clean water or gender equality, etc. And to me, I think that that you know, governments are sitting up and realizing that they need to broaden their definition of diaspora.
I think that's incredibly enriching. I want to just take a minute or two to kind of untangle it, because there's a lot there. I think there's a couple of PhDs in it.
Yeah, there is.
Look, I think you're touching on one word that you use that I think is incredibly important, and it's about place. And I think, you know, I have to be very careful how I say this as somebody that comes from a part of the world where the new Irish Taoiseach has no minister for the west of Ireland. so I'll be careful how I say it. But look, what we often found in Ireland is, you know, it's not about necessarily Ireland. It's about a town. It's about a county. It's about a place. And I think you're touching on something much bigger as well, getting away from the affinity and the belonging and the place piece to the idea of talent and international competitiveness. Now, I can tell you two very quick stories that encapsulate what you're talking about. I've seen the data for one of the largest startup grants from a Western government, and on average, about 25% of the awardees for that startup grant are people that have come and studied in the country but have subsequently left the country. So you can see that that lens of what you're talking about has very real impact. And I think the final component that you talked about in terms of diplomacy, we're in an age where 21st century statecraft is changing in front of our eyes, and small countries in particular are under a lot of pressure. You know, the big countries, you probably cannot rely on them as much as we once did. And particularly around international development as well, we're seeing this rise of diaspora in the global south, not just because of the SDGs, but just because of the hard reality of where we are. So you've kind of identified the key thematics. I just wanted to re-energize them and re-emphasize them for people listening. But where do you see then the potential for the service that alumni can engage with diaspora? You know, because here's the hidden secret.
Yeah.
Alumni engagement is much more developed than diaspora engagement is. It has a much deeper history, and it has a much more complex ecosystem that you mentioned that we're only beginning to scratch the surface on diaspora engagement. Now, I want to counter what I said about being much more historically based in terms of alumni engagement. Diaspora engagement has been happening for centuries inadvertently, whether it's sending letters, communication, you can go back as far as you want, but in a structured way and in a formatted way. We're quite young on diaspora engagement. So my big question is, you've touched all the major topics that I think will be really interesting to the audience, but then how do we get the alumni world and the diaspora world working together? Because we probably don't as much as we should. So how do we make that happen? Any ideas, any concerns, anything to go with that?
Yeah, it's interesting because, of course, you're right. Alumni engagement has been happening for decades longer, and they have a formula on how alumni engagement works. So this is no surprise. Especially in the university sector. So that's not surprising. I think once it kind of has developed in kind of other sectors, I think that they've started to put their own stamp on it, and they've created their own ways, and they've recreated how alumni can engage. And I think one of the things that I think would be the most powerful would be to say, yes, let's take some of the good components on how alumni engagement has worked, and include that in our alumni engagement on a more macro scale. So looking at, say, a government wide engagement, but also how can we ensure that these alumni are also engaging with a wider diaspora? So how can we kind of make sure that they're not just becoming an exclusive group of here are our alumni, but how do we kind of be able to kind of merge these? And I think, to me, that's a big and a very a bold question, because to me there is an opportunity when these people kind of connect. I think that the synergies would be powerful. I think that the opportunities can be powerful, because people have had, it is that sense again, Martin, about that place. People have this as their shared connection. Their shared connection is place. And so if you brought, the traditional diaspora together with alumni diaspora, to me, I just think that the opportunities would be incredible. So how, and to me, that's part of the reason why, if they were having a wider diaspora strategy, alumni is an essential component. So an essential component of that strategy. But also is to say, well, how are we going to, bring events or initiatives where we can bring these groups together? Are we going to be, funding things where we can do things together? Are we going to have, tell those stories? You were talking about storytelling earlier. How are we going to tell these stories so that we're telling alumni stories and diaspora stories, and that people are getting to see both? So it's not just become a place where alumni are only seeing alumni stories and diaspora only seeing diaspora stories. To me, it's about a wider ecosystem. And to me, that is the big opportunity, is about how do we kind of merge these two kind of mini ecosystem to become a larger ecosystem that can be of mutual benefit for those that are involved, but also for whatever country, if it's Ireland Inc. or whatever country that is looking at doing this. And to me, I the place, I think that, you were asking me about where KITE fits in, in a lot of this. And to me, I kind of feel that, I believe that KITE can kind of bring that kind of strategy piece from the alumni side, and that expertise from the alumni side, to be able to contribute to a wider a wider diaspora strategy, to say, well, this is how you find these people. This is how you kind of can outreach these people. These are who your people are. Here's the definition of your alumni. And this is how they've said they want to get involved. That's the other thing, is about, giving them a voice. I think that's really important. It's about that voice. And I'm sure that in the diaspora space, it's very much the same. And then to say, well, this is where it overlaps with the rest of the strategy. And this is where we can have these kind of conversations. And to me, that's where, it's kind of giving that high level, strategic, kind of vision to kind of a wholeness to a diaspora strategy to include, alumni. And, I've had people approach me and say, what about people who've studied, like, in the Irish case, they might have studied the Irish language in Ireland. Are they alumni? And I say, well, if the country wants to include them, I think that, if they have an affinity to the place, we should include them. This is about being as inclusive as possible with the definition, and it has to be, how the country feels, and how this can become a wider strategy. So that's kind of, it's like pieces in a puzzle, Martin. To me, your puzzle's incomplete without an alumni piece.
No, look, I completely buy into that, and I think the beauty of the message that you're getting across is it's not just about having alumni in and around the strategy. It's about having people with expertise on alumni at the table designing it.
Yeah, absolutely.
which is probably the more important piece of the step in many ways. So look, just to close up and kind of wrap up. First of all, thank you for your time. I know it's early morning wherever you are.
Thank you, Martin. It's been a pleasure. It's great.
So, look, I love. Look, let's finish in a moment about how people can connect with you and reach out to you and get in touch with you. You know, or maybe how our network can help more broadly, or the people listening to this can help. But you know, we're eternal optimists, Kingsley and I, about the future, despite all the.
Add me to that list. Yeah.
Despite all the doom and gloom, you know. So Kingsley asked me a question in the first one that I think is a really great question to finish on, in the sense of, if you looked into your crystal ball and you said in the next, you know, 3 years, 5 years, wherever long you want to put it, where's this alumni diaspora engagement going? Or do you just have 1 or 2 tips for people that are either beginning, halfway through this journey, or thinking about where to go next? You know, so just a sense of your future vision, where you see it all going, and just 1 or 2 tips for people.
I think the number one is that, you know, alumni is sometimes mentioned as an add-on to a strategy. So the word alumni is kind of folded in there into a strategy. To me, I think that the future is that people are going to realize, or, you know, that the recognition will be alumni is more than just an add-on. It's actually, like I said, an essential. It's going to be, you know, have its own kind of, you know, component of either a strategy or, you know, a direction that, and I think that that's an important component, that it isn't just going to be something that people are going to say, oh yeah, we'll also include alumni in there. But to me, it's going to become a much more of an essential. And to me, that's where it's going. And that, you know, the trends across Europe say that, you know, Martin, and across the world, is that, you know, more and more countries, I mean, this year, there's been 3 or 4 new countries that are looking at, you know, alumni engagement. And, you know, why are they looking at this? And I think it's because they realize the potential that that these people, that people who have studied in their countries, people who have gone abroad but have had a study experience there, are important. So to me, that's going to be happening more and more, is that countries are going to be sitting up and thinking about, you know, how to coordinate that at a more macro level, at a national level, or even at a regional level. It could happen much more. I think that that's going to happen more, is that people are going to be thinking about, you know, alumni in its broadest sense as a component of a diaspora strategy. To me, that's going to be one. The other one is about, you know, where alumni how alumni can also contribute to that internationalization of education space. And to me, that's going to become, obviously that's an essential, because, you know, we're encountering a lot of unknowns in that, bringing international students to our countries to study. Especially, you know, during this pandemic, it's become, you know, acutely important. And that alumni bring a lot of, we were talking about trust earlier. They bring a lot of trust, a lot of legitimacy, credibility to that space. People believe and want to hear from alumni more than they want to hear the marketing spiel from a country, you know, and that's the reality. And so I think, to me, that's going to become an essential, is how do we mobilize alumni to build that internationalization piece of our education? If we want to continue to have people coming into the country, you know, and that they are going to build in alumni much more in that internationalization of education piece. And then finally, Martin, I do feel that there is that piece of saying, you know, we want to track our alumni because of their impact and their potential and impact on the Sustainable Development Goals. I think that that is going to be a big one, is to say, what is the interface between people who have studied in our country and the impact that they're having globally, the sustainable impact that they're having. They have impact rankings right now for universities. That's great. That's on a micro level. Countries are going to want to say, well, what have these people done to contribute to? And to me, that's a place that, you know, KITE can also fit in. I'm very interested in looking at different ways that we can actually, you know, either track alumni or looking about how they have the impact on the SDGs once they've left, gone back to their home country or gone back to a third country. And to me, that is, that's my crystal ball feeling, that this is going to happen more and more, and that alumni are not going to be an add-on anymore. It's going to become this essential.
And timely and much needed.
Absolutely.
Look, from my end, Maria, look, I just want to say on a personal note, you know, I've had the privilege of sitting down with you when Skype was on, or when KITE was on paper.
Yeah.
You know, so I just want to say I'm incredibly proud of what you're doing with it, where you're going with it. there's exciting days ahead. I know the last few months were always going to be choppy.
Yeah.
Given what's going on with the world, but look, I think you've displayed over the last hour that you're on top of your game. So I leave you with a very positive message that I heard not too long ago when you were speaking about talent. And this came from a very prominent CEO who said the global war for talent is over. Talent has won.
Yeah.
So look, I think countries, organizations, cities, everybody that's involved, that's looking in terms of how they want to play a role competitively back in terms of their local economies, local markets, internationally, will be looking at this topic more and more. So look, best of luck to you on the road ahead. Final point, how can people reach out? How can people connect?
So if they want to reach me, you can go to our website. It's keepintoucheducation.com. You can just reach out. I'd love to hear emails from anybody. So it's Maria, Maria at keepintoucheducation.com. And I'd love to have a conversation, reach out, and then, have a conversation about, looking at the strategy around the, alumni strategy and how, and also, just from either a coaching perspective, maybe it's about, how I can help coach you through your own strategy, or equally be involved in helping you devise that strategy. I'm happy to do either or. So delighted to be involved.
Perfect. And alumni equals diaspora, right?
Absolutely. I 100% believe that. And good note to end on there, Martin.
That's it. Look, thanks for your time, buddy.
Thank you so much, Martin. You've always been great. I always enjoy our chats.
Nice,
Take care now.
Bye-bye.